Hi, hello, my name is Gomer Joseph. I hope you've all been having a great day so far. If you are new, I welcome you. It's really crazy to think that this is the last video of the year, and like this year went by so fast. Like 2022 definitely was trying to go ahead and, check out as soon as possible. So, because it is the end of the year, I really wish that I could have had a more positive story to share, but as you can tell from the title, I won't be doing that at all. Today, I will be discussing the Columbine High School tragedy. Let me tell you something. Out of all of the cases that I've covered, this has to be one of those cases which truly troubles me. Now, over the years, like I've heard about Columbine, and just knowing the details that I was told was disturbing enough, but doing the research disturbed me more. Before Columbine, there were tragedies that happened in schools which were pretty rare and not as chaotic. Yes, people did lose their lives in those tragedies, but it just wasn't as massive as Columbine was. Sadly, because of what happened at Columbine, I grew up with lockdowns and kids basically making escape plans in case something like Columbine would happen at school. Like, y'all, like, I kid you not, like, I'm really gonna try to go ahead and keep my composure throughout this video because researching this case was a trip. Like, very few cases, though the cases that I have discussed are tragic and, disturbing, but these are just one of those cases where, I would research and it would give me nightmares. Here's the thing that I don't really tell, like, a good amount of people, but now I'm just basically already telling the world. Usually, like, I sleep beside my Bible, and, just in case, like, I get to a point where, I don't know, like, when I was, like, growing up, I was never really a fan of sleeping in the dark, but, that light bill cannot go high, so I had to go ahead and turn off the light when I sleep. And I mean, it's easier to go ahead and sleep when it's dark anyway, but let me just not go ahead and rant. Like, I just usually like keep a Bible beside me just in case like I have night terrors. Like, the thing about this case, like researching it, like I literally had to like sleep like clutching my Bible like close to my chest because of, you know, it just really troubled me. Like, that's how bad this case troubled me. Like, it was really that bad. Now, I encourage you all to do your own research with this case and not to just look at my video for all of the information. Here we go. Starting this video off, like when I was doing research and everything and like, adding to my notes, like I wasn't really exactly sure how to start this off. Pretty much it would make sense to go ahead and start it off by, of course, talking about the events which led to the tragedy at Columbine. So sadly, because I really hate how I have to go ahead and make the villains of this story the, main focus, because the main focus should be those who they victimized. But pretty much I really have no choice but to talk about these two monsters, and I just had to go ahead and explain like how they became monsters. So I'm just gonna go ahead and get these out of the way. I'll start off by talking about Dylan Klebold. So before the shooting, people have described Dylan as somebody who was nice. He was a shy kid. He was known to be a good student and well behaved. Then there is Eric Harris. Growing up, he was a military kid. His father was in the military, so they pretty much had to go ahead and move around a lot, which made it hard for him to keep friends. And people had described Eric as somebody who was smart and funny. Now, Eric and Dylan's lives would collide when they met in high school, and I believe that they met in like freshman year. As you will see throughout the video, these are two kids who have their own fair share of issues. Like, it seems like, growing up, these two, like, they really, had positive qualities. Like, they would seem like normal kids to you, but they just had some deep, dark issues. And when they became friends, their friendship just became one of those examples of how two people should really like never ever connect because of the issues that they have. Because when two people, form a friendship or relationship and they just have issues like they did, it just a pretty much brings disaster. Now, Eric and Dylan, they are in high school, they're friends, and they have, their own sets of friends. And according to their set of friends, um, high school was pretty much not easy for them. Eric and Dylan would, according to their friends, they would have to deal with jocks who, actually the thing about, I'm just going to kind of make quotation marks because from what they explained about jocks, the jocks, all of them weren't athletes. They were pretty much the people who had like this little hierarchy in the school. Like they were pretty much like the quote unquote popular crowd. Eric and Dylan were not part of that crowd. They didn't really have as many friends as the quote unquote jocks did. So because of that, according to Dylan and Eric's friends, the jocks would be messing with them and just bullying them. While having issues in high school, Dylan would actually have a journal that he would write in, and you can go ahead and find these journals online. I believe you can go ahead and find them on YouTube as well. I definitely was not gonna go ahead and read through all that because there's a lot that Dylan wrote, and it just very, I mean, especially with what he and Eric did, I was not trying to go ahead and disturb my peace of mind more than it already was disturbed. In his journals, Dylan would write about how extremely depressed he was, and he even added some very hateful language, and he was just expressing how he did not want to live on this earth anymore. Eric, he didn't really have a notebook journal, but he was definitely sharing what he felt online. And the thing about him writing online, he created this like private online web page, and on this web page, I mean, I would have to go ahead and like comparing it with like Dylan and his and Eric's sort of journaling. Eric was a very angry young man. Like, he would write very violent language. He was just full of hate in these journals, and he even admitted to being racist. Yet, I'm supposed to feel bad for him being bullied. Like I said, on this private webpage, he would just talk about some very violent things to the point where he wanted to take a lot of lives. Because that's the sad thing. Like, even though they were having their, so called issues at school, these two kids had a promising future. But because these two pretty much united, like, their bright future truly took a dark turn. Since I'm on the topic of their lives at high school, I wasn't really sure where to go ahead and piece this little information inside of the video, so I'm just gonna go ahead and get this out of the way. So after the events of the tragedy, Eric and Dylan were rumored to be part of this group called the Trenchcoat Mafia. Eric would wear trench coats, Dylan would wear trench coats, and there was a group of kids who wore trench coats who called themselves the Trenchcoat Mafia. But according to those who were actually in the, I guess I can say, official Trenchcoat Mafia, Dylan and Eric were not a part of this group, but they were friends with people within the group. The Trenchcoat Mafia pretty much kept to themselves. Because they kept to themselves, they were rumored to be this outcast, dangerous, gothic group. But according to those in the Trenchcoat Mafia, all they really did was like play video games and play, I guess, what would you call like Dungeons and Dragons? Because they said that they played Dungeons and Dragons. I never played Dungeons and Dragons. I don't really have any plan on playing Dungeons and Dragons. But isn't it like a board game? Like I know it's like a role playing game. Yeah, that's what they would just do. But overall, Eric and Dylan were friends with people in this group. They were not, official members of it. Once again, these are two kids who had bright futures, but they decided to make some very, let me say, awful choices. I'm not going to go ahead and go into much detail about it. I'm pretty sure all of that I'm going to go ahead and say is pretty much out of order, but Dylan and Eric would actually get themselves involved with petty crime. They would write swear words on somebody's locker. They would hack the school system and found students' locker combinations and stole computer equipment from a van. Dylan's mom, who knew that her son had potential and knew that he did have a bright future, did not want him going down this terrible path. And, she was talking with other parents, telling them what Dylan was getting involved in, but the parents that Dylan's mom was speaking to was basically saying, oh, he'll be fine, he's just a teenager, this is just a phase, this soon will pass. But still, I understand that when you're a teenager you're still going to go ahead and make stupid choices, but people have to learn that there are consequences to the choices that you make. While Dylan's parents seemed concerned, Eric's father, let me go ahead and just talk about Eric's father a bit later. But as for Eric's mother, when she was told about the stuff that Eric was doing, I was hearing that she would just, be very emotional and start crying. But as for Eric's father, he pretty much stood by his son's side. I know I don't know the man personally, but Eric's father is kind of sound like trash. Because I'm very surprised that with the trouble that Eric was getting into, that his father was, basically staying by his side. Because again, like I discussed earlier, Eric's father was in the military, and when you're in the military, you're supposed to have, you're supposed to be like this man of honor and make sure that your family follows your example. But Eric's father was like, listen, I know my son did all this stuff, but he's just a quote unquote good kid at heart. Y'all gotta go ahead and just let him live. That's pretty much the vibe that I was getting from Eric's father. Now, Eric, he would actually get himself into even more trouble. There would be cases where he got into an altercation with his friend whose name is Brooks Brown, who was actually friends with Dylan first ever since they were little kids. Now back to the altercation between Eric and Brooks. I know that there was this one instance where Eric just got so angry, he threw, I guess, some sort of ice or snowball at Brooks' car window and ended up breaking the window. Of course, Brooks can't hide a broken window from his parents, so his parents get word of this, and his parents are like, listen, this is not okay. They decided to go ahead and involve the police. But when they did, this did not make Eric happy at all. He was pretty much very upset that Brooks' parents involved the police, that he wrote online that he wanted to take Brooks' life. Once again, Eric's webpage was private, so Brooks Brown only found out about this webpage because a specific person told him about it. Brooks tells his mom about the threats on Eric's webpage, and he doesn't share his friend's name who gave him the information about Eric's webpage, because he stated that this friend was afraid of Eric. Who is this friend, you might ask? This friend was none other than Dylan Klebold. When I heard about that, it just blew my mind because I'm not sure if this took place before or after they made such heinous plans. But Brooke's mom stated how this seemed like a cry for help for Dylan, and I can't help but agree with her. Sadly, at the end of the day, Dylan still chose to do what he did. Like I said, Brooke's parents would involve the police, but as I'm pretty sure that because of the events that happened, we should be able to gather the fact that the police didn't really do nothing. Like, they didn't even get a warrant for Eric. Because when Brooke's parents went to the police, telling them everything that Eric was doing, how violent he was becoming, the police claimed that they were going to keep a close eye on Eric, but they did not. Again, I'm really sorry if this does seem to be pretty much out of order, but like, this is just the flow that just seems a bit natural to me. So now Eric was sent to Brooke Brown's house to apologize for all of the trouble that he is causing for Brooks. But his parent, I mean, not Eric's parents, but Brooke's parents knew how crazy, I'll go ahead and say it, they knew that something was off with Eric, and they were seeing how crazy this boy was becoming, and they were not buying his fake apology. Let me say that again. They were not buying his fake whack apology. So Brooke's parents told Eric to stay far away from their son and far away from their house. When they told Eric to stay away, they remembered how enraged Eric became and that he stormed off. As you can see, Eric and Dylan are going down a very dark path. They are going down a very dark path to the point where, because of the decisions that they're making and feeling like they are the lowest of the low at their school, the two would eventually agree. Sometime in 1998, I believe, these two would eventually agree to make plans to take out as many people as they could at their school by blowing it up and shoot at people who ran out of the building. As for Eric's family, he's a military kid. I'm pretty sure he knew how to get a hold of, certain weapons and guns like that. But as for Dylan's family, they did not like the idea of having a gun in the house at all. But with the plan that Eric and Dylan began to have, neither of them were concerned about what their parents would have thought. The two of them, because when they had this plan, they were 17 and they were not legally able to buy guns. So they were able to get a hold of them because of an irresponsible adult that they both knew. Now, this adult, who I do consider irresponsible, to me, I understand that she claimed that she had no idea what these two would have done. And I believe her. I would agree that most likely she had no idea what Harris and Klebold were planning. But again, without her, they wouldn't have been able to obtain the guns legally. And her name was Robin Anderson. And Robin wasn't really that much older than them anyway. She was 18. Because, my problem, why she seems so irresponsible. I know that when you're 18, you're still not really fully developed in the brain and everything like that. So I understand that, 18-year-olds could, be irresponsible just because, there's just a new sense of freedom. But you are buying guns for your friends when their parents have not even been informed that they would be even getting guns. Because when Dylan wanted to go ahead and get himself a gun. Like, actually, the thing is that before he got his friend Robin to get the guns for him, Dylan asked his mom if he could get a gun, and his mom said absolutely not. But from what Robin said, all she did was just go inside of the store with them, and that they would have been legally able to buy their own guns on their own as long as an adult was present. Again, Robin stated that she had absolutely no idea what sort of crime these two would commit at their school. But still, like, my thing is that she should have known that their parents wouldn't have agreed with this. Like, their parents, like, you can't just go ahead and make decisions for somebody when their parents absolutely forbid it. Not only would these two obtain guns, but they would also begin making bombs, and they were able to hide this from their parents for like a year. Like, Harris and Klebold were going all out on this plan. Like, they were drawing out maps. They set a time on where and when they were going to bomb the school, and where to specifically place these bombs. Not only were they preparing for this disaster at their school, but they would record themselves with a video camera of what they were about to do and showing all the weapons they attained. And though it wasn't released, I'll go ahead and discuss that later. Like, in these tapes, like, they just spoke so vile and just so hateful. After the events that would take place at the school, people did notice that there were warning signs, but they didn't really see it as warning signs because, again, this was the 90s. Like, this was the late 90s. Things like Columbine did not happen. So I can't really blame everybody for not picking up on the warning signs, because what Dylan and Eric were planning, like, it was just unheard of that high schoolers would do something like this. But of course, looking back at it now, like, people were able to pick out these warning signs. Because the thing is, like, the Brown family, like, they didn't know exactly what Eric and Dylan were planning, but they tried to inform the police before something happened. They didn't know what was going to happen exactly, but they tried to go ahead and notify the police before something happened, but the police did not do anything. Like, Eric was out here writing poems in class where he had to add an object, and he added a bullet, and that in this poem his best friend was a gun. As for Dylan, he wrote this essay in creative writing class where he was in awe of a character who took countless lives. Granted, the teacher did try to talk with Dylan to see where his head was after reading this creative writing essay, but it ended up being ignored since he was insisting that it was only a story. Like, as for their demeanor, like, looking at pictures, I even noticed that their demeanor and faces started to change around this time. Like, it's really creepy. Like, their demeanors, like, they looked like normal kids. Like, their demeanors looked to be something, like, much darker. Like, before they began to have these dark thoughts, like, they look like normal kids. But after these thoughts came, after having these plans, they looked like they were turning into literal demons. Like, write that in the comment section if you are seeing what I'm seeing, because that is absolutely creepy. The sad part is that in regards to Dylan, like, I'm not sure about Eric. Like, it doesn't seem like Eric was doing this, but Dylan was involved with school activities. Like, he would help out with school plays. He applied and was accepted into college. Now, Eric, he did apply to college, but all the schools rejected him. I don't know, I guess the SAT scores weren't cutting it. I guess his grades weren't cutting it. I don't know why he was rejected, but they rejected him. And he even tried to apply to the army, but the army rejected him only because he was on antidepressants. So college and the military weren't an option for Eric, but like trade school wasn't an option for him either. He would also ask a girl out to prom, but the girl rejected him. I say smart girl. You can call me a jerk. I couldn't care less, but that's exactly what he gets. As for Dylan, before I think this is like a few days before he and Eric did what they set out to do, Dylan went to the prom. And it's just weird because he's going to the prom with these kids. He's helping out with school plays and doing these extracurricular activities, and all along he is trying. He is not, well, yeah, he's trying. He is planning to take all of their lives. Because in recent years, the argument is that Dylan was the follower while Eric was, while I'll go ahead and be more specific. In recent years, like the debate is that Dylan was like more of the depressed follower while Eric was the psychopath. But both of these are just, I call them both psychopaths, because you have to be an absolute psychopath to be in working in plays, going to prom with the student body, and you plan on taking out the entire student body. After planning for a year, the day that they set had sadly arrived on April 20th of 1999. As a good portion of us know, 420, the date 420 is known for the day where people celebrate being high as a kite. But the chilling thing about the date April 20 is that this is Adolf Hitler's birthday. Eric admitted to being racist. He was also very interested in Nazis. So this was really thought out. Like, them doing what they did on this date is not a coincidence. Like, on top of that, like on this day, like they were wearing trench coats, but on the shirt that Eric was wearing, the shirt said natural selection. They waited outside of the school because their bombs were already placed in the cafeteria. Now, here is the thing about the Columbine tragedy. I know that in tragedies like this one, people, have like the gun argument, but this wasn't intended to be a school shooting. Like, Columbine was, in fact, a failed bombing. But I kid you not, like, this is where divine intervention comes in. Like, by the grace of God, those bombs did not go off because, like I said, they planned on bombing the school. They were waiting outside the school for remaining students and teachers to run out, then try to take out as many people as they could. But praise God, the tragedy did not go as they planned. The thing is that Eric and Dylan did not have a plan B. So after, knowing that their plan A failed, like, that is just what creeps me out. Like, they did not have a plan B, and they ended up doing what they did. According to what he said, like, Brooks Brown went outside to go ahead and, smoke a cigarette or whatever. And he catches Eric, and he doesn't notice any weapons on Eric at that time. From what I gathered, Brooks noticed that there was a bag, but he didn't really he didn't know that Eric had any weapons inside of that bag. He noticed that Eric did not show up to class that day, and there was like this huge exam for class that day, and the school year was almost over. So Brooks, he sees Eric, he curses him out when he sees him, pointing out, that he was skipping school and that he missed this big exam. Now, the thing about Brooks Brown, and I'm just gonna call him Harris from now on, because Eric is, he has become a monster at this point. Brooks is told by Harris that, the test and anything to do with it did not matter. And, they were just having like this whole on and off again friendship. Because when I first heard that Brooks was confronting Eric, I'm like, why are you confronting this boy who is trying to go ahead and take your life? But it just seemed like they just had this continual on and off again friendship. Eric proceeded to tell Brooks that he likes him now and warns him not to go into the school and to tell him to get away from the school. Basically telling Brooks to go home. Before I discuss the acts of violence that occurred that day, the sad thing about Columbine itself is that we know that people lost their lives that day. That's, just if you know anything about Columbine, you know that people lost their lives that day. But yet it is the monsters' names that are always mentioned. And the victims seem to be, they're not mentioned as much as these monsters. So to make things flow naturally, I'm just going to go ahead and discuss the victims before I discuss the acts of violence that Harris and Klebold created that day. Daniel Monster was described as a boy who was shy, sweet, lovable, and even gave his mother a hug wherever they were. I really hope I'm saying his last name right, but Kyle Velasquez was somebody who, he was special needs. When he was a toddler, he had a stroke. So when his life was taken away, he didn't know to hide. Kyle was described as somebody who liked simple things. He enjoyed panda bears and loved coloring. Kyle was described as compassionate, always smiling, loved his family, and was forgiving. Rachel Scott was a girl who was described to be strong in her faith. She was someone who wanted to make a difference in the lives of others. Rachel knew how to make people smile. She was bold, loved to journal, and artistic. Like, she'd always be writing poems and drawing. Dave Sanders was a teacher at Columbine, but he was also a coach, husband, father, and grandfather. He was described as someone who was selfless, likable, and thought of others. Cassie Bernal was a girl who grew up in a Christian household, but though you grow up in a Christian household, you don't automatically, you're not automatically born a Christian. You have to be born again and make that choice to serve God. Cassie was described as a girl who had her challenges. She was said to have been going down the wrong path, being influenced by listening to very disturbing music from Marilyn Manson. And her parents saw the path that she was going and took away from Cassie those dark influences. They were focused on getting her on the right path. After this weekend church youth trip, she was beginning to take her faith seriously. Cassie was described as a girl who was quiet, smart, strong, and strong in what she believed in. She was described as somebody who had a glow about her and wanted to be an example to unbelievers and believers. Isaiah Shows was described as someone who was generous, funny, strong. He respected others. He loved music and loved creating music. Lauren Townsend was described as a girl who was intelligent. She was this straight A student who loved animals. She was very concerned about environmental issues, enjoyed writing, had a beautiful smile and laugh. Matthew Ketcher was athletic. He loved playing in the outdoors. He was known to be kind, intelligent, and made good grades. Corey DePuter was described as someone who was full of life. He was fun to be around, talkative, silly. He enjoyed spending time in nature. He also had dreams of joining the Marines and wanting to have a family of his own someday. I hope I'm saying his last name right. Daniel Warbo. He was someone who was described to lit up a room. He was sensitive, caring, loved giving hugs. His laugh was contagious. Daniel had the desire to learn, and family was extremely important to him. Stephen Kernroe was described as someone who was quiet, thoughtful, generous. He was always willing to help someone. He was known to be forgiving, loved playing soccer. He enjoyed reading books and watching adventure films, and dreamed of becoming a pilot. Kelly Fleming was a girl who was described as a gentle soul who loved writing poetry. John Tomlin was a boy who was described as someone who took his faith seriously. He loved cats, loved baseball. He was family oriented and was described as a gentleman. What Harris and Klebold did was just so unfathomable, just so wicked and tragic. But what's really sad is that, and disturbing, was that they had a hit list. But to my knowledge, none of the people that they harmed were even on that list. Now, I am going to describe the events of what happened to the best of my ability. Now, after seeing, once again, this was supposed to be a bombing, and the bombs did not go off like Harris and Klebold intended. They did not have a plan B, so they decided to just do whatever. Harris and Klebold approached the school where they spotted Rachel Scott, who was 17 years old, and after spotting her and her friend Richard Castaldo, who was also 17 years old, they at first threw a pipe bomb at them. But praise the Lord, that pipe bomb did not go off, but they just ended up being confused and thought this was some sort of senior prank going on, because again, nobody in that school imagined that something that they were about to experience would even happen. But sadly, Rachel and her friend Richard would end up getting hit. Sadly, Rachel would lose her life at 17 years old. Daniel Rohrabo was with friends named Sean Graves and Lance Kirkland. Lance and Sean were injured by the shots, but sadly, Daniel lost his life at 15. When Harris and Klebold started shooting, there were plenty of students who never really heard gunshots up close like that before. Plenty of them truly thought that there was a senior prank going on, or that they were hearing fireworks. Sadly, it wasn't a stupid senior prank. Unfortunately, they were not fireworks. Dave Sanders is in the cafeteria and he sees what is going on and tries, once he notices what is going on, he does his best to evacuate the students in the cafeteria. Once the students begin to evacuate, that's pretty much when things get out of control. Again, nothing like Columbine ever happened, so there were no protocol in schools for tragedies like this one. So I can only imagine the terror that these kids were facing. When the police arrived, these two stupid demons decided to shoot at the police. Now, Patty Nilsson was a faculty member of the school who, she sees what's going on. She is actually shot in the shoulder by Eric, I believe, because at first she thought that they bought in the guns because they were always recording videos, but she describes the chilling detail where Eric smiles at her and shoots her. By the grace of God, she is able to make it to the library, yelling at the students to get under the tables to hide the best that they can while calling 911. Patty wasn't the only person calling 911. There were actually a lot of people calling 911, which I can imagine was affecting the lines. Dave Sanders, while he does his best to make sure that everyone in the school is safe and secure, sadly he ended up getting hit and was able to be pulled into a nearby classroom. Those inside of the classroom kept talking with him about, his family and stuff like that. But sadly, he would pass away since the police didn't make it into the school. Like the police, I'm going to go ahead and talk about this a bit more later on, but the police waited like hours until they made it into the school. And once they got to Dave, he wouldn't even be able to make it to the hospital alive. As this chaos is ensuing, Eric and Dylan make their way to the library where Patty and so many students are inside. And the 911 call is available online. I'm not sharing that here. Y'all can go ahead and look that up yourselves, but that 911 call is very disturbing and chilling. And as for Eric and Dylan, they are demanding that everyone get up as they threaten to blow up the library. But of course, there are these two psychopaths outside of the library with guns, so nobody was going to be moving. When they entered the library, Patty remembers one of them proceeding to bang the table where she was hiding. Now, Patty states that she was unsure if they saw her and tried to scare her, or if they just decided to bang that table just because. But just even thinking about that, ugh, it just it I can't. I have no words to describe it. Those who survived have stated how they remember Harris and Klebold just saying the most vile and hateful things at people before shooting them. Like asking people if they believe in God, then shooting them. Because, these two demons expressed their hatred towards God. So not only were they racist, but they also hated Christians. The chilling part about it was that it was said that they were having a blast while taking so many lives, which just makes me sick to my stomach. Like, that is just so demonic. After the two demons left the library, the students and teacher escaped the library. Praise God they did, because the two demons came back after basically blowing up the cafeteria. Those who lost their lives in the library were 16-year-old Kyle Velasquez, 14-year-old Stephen Kernrow, 17-year-old Cassie Bernil, 18-year-old Isaiah Schultz. As for Isaiah, here's the thing, with Columbine, it wasn't really a diverse school. He was actually one of the only black students at the school. So when those two demons spotted Isaiah, they would proceed to not only call him the N-word, but they would try to pull him out. But Isaiah kept fighting. Like, looking at the pictures of Isaiah, and of course, hearing the sort of guy that Isaiah was, he was big. If Dylan and Eric didn't have the weapons that they had, I believe that Isaiah honestly could have taken them both down without, Eric and Dylan having the weapons that they had. But Isaiah, he just would not allow them to pull him out of that table. And it is said that from his friend Craig Scott, who was actually Rachel Scott's brother, Craig stated how Isaiah was calling out for his mother. But sadly, Isaiah's life was taken away. Matthew Ketcher, who was actually beside Isaiah and Craig, was 16 years old when he lost his life as well. But Craig, he had this survival instinct. He was pretty much in between them and pretended that he had also lost his life. And I cannot imagine the trauma that Craig still feels to this day. Lauren Townsend was 18 years old, and she was also in the library when she lost her life. John Tomlin lost his life. Kelly Fleming, who was 16 years old, lost her life. Daniel Mosser was 15 when he lost his life, and Corey DePuter was somebody else who lost his life in the library. Like I mentioned before, like Harris and Klebold never took the lives of those they claimed were making their lives miserable at school. Like I think there's like one account where they were using scare tactics with a quote unquote jock, but they didn't take his life. Like praise the Lord, they didn't. But they just harmed and took the lives of people who did absolutely nothing to them. Like they took the lives of people who most likely didn't even know them. Now, this chaos ensued for 15 minutes. And like I mentioned before, 911 was called. So people who are watching this video and you're not familiar with the case, you might be asking like where the police were. Like I mentioned before, there was no protocol, so the police were taking their good old time for hours outside of the school while children were losing their lives. And that's the thing, like, you know that there are mostly kids inside of a school. And you like eventually find out that the shooters are actually students themselves, like basically making them like amateurs. But you mean to tell me that the SWAT team that was called, like none of you couldn't go into the building to make sure that the shootings were stopped? Because from what I gathered, like there were a group of cops who were near the library entrance, and they heard lives being lost, but yet none of them rescued the kids inside of that library. And I get it. Like, I understand that you arrive at this crime scene, you don't really know what you're gonna step into when you walk into the building, but for your job description as an officer, it is the job description is to put your life on the line to make sure that other people are protected. I stand on this viewpoint where I say that the cops failed to do their job that day. While the chaos is going on, Harris's father actually called 911 as he got news of what was happening at the school. He calls 911 and tells them that he suspects that his son was involved. My guess is that something might have clicked inside of, Eric's father's head, because since Harris and Klebold got into trouble before the cops and, with the Browns family, I guess Eric's father, like, pretty much knew that his son was involved with all this. But after the tragedy, I just find it very weird that Harris's parents refused to talk to the police unless they were granted immunity. Like, you state that like you had no idea that your son was hiding all these weapons in the house and that you had no idea what he was planning, but what would you need immunity for? Klebold's father would also call 911. When he first heard the details of what was going on at the school, he initially thought that Dylan was in danger because, like I mentioned earlier on in the video, like Dylan was not described as a kid who was violent. But then he continued hearing details about the shooting and heard how the suspects were wearing black trench coats. That's where something clicked inside of Dylan's father's head, and he began to go ahead and search the room to see if the black trench coat was there. Before he could spot a black trench coat, the police came to the house, and that's pretty much what gave Klebold's father the confirmation of his son's involvement with this chaos going on at the school. Those two demons, after taking the lives of 12 kids, one teacher, and wounding 22 others. And you know what? Here's the thing, like, people lost their lives. People were injured. But everybody in that building was also victimized. Like, those two demons caused so much chaos, victimizing everybody in the school. They ended up, because this was part of their plan, they ended up taking their lives, finally ending the chaos that they created. It doesn't even end there. So the chaos is done. People are trying to find their kids. People find out that their kids and loved ones did not make it. There's an investigation going on because they know who did it, but they pretty much have to still do the investigation anyway. So after finding out what Harris and Klebold were planning, and seeing the chaos that they have done, the police just found so many weapons in their rooms. I mean, maybe if they took the complaints seriously before and they served a warrant, this tragedy might have not even happened in the first place. Investigators would proceed to discover the journals that these two demons wrote, even discovering the videotapes that were made in Eric's basement. Now, I mentioned this earlier on in the video. Those tapes were actually not released to the public. Only the Harrises and Klebolds watched it. So did family members of the victims, and Brooks Brown's parents were able to watch it. The videos, of course, like I said, they were described as Harris and Klebold pretty much getting everything ready for this chaos that they were beginning to make. But also, the tapes also described them, just saying the most evil, hateful things imaginable. Over the years, people have demanded that these tapes be released because it was actually said that these tapes were destroyed, but people, are still asking for it. People still want this leak of the basement tapes, and in my opinion, I believe that people want to go ahead and see them only because the nation is really looking for some final answer or some sort of closure. The community and even the nation were reeling from what had transpired. Yet after what transpired, the community really came together to heal from what they endured. I really wish that this story had a happy ending. There are days where I wish that these two demons didn't take their own lives so that they could face the crimes that they committed. But again, I know that they didn't escape judgment. As a born-again Christian, I keep in mind that they couldn't escape God's judgment. I really wish that I could say that after Columbine, that students and school employees didn't lose their lives in these sort of tragedies at other schools. Sadly, we all know how that is not the case. Like I told you guys already, this case truly troubled me. I know that in cases like this, there's always talks about bullying and mental illness, and even talks about gun control or gun reform or whatever. But before I say anything else, no one should ever be bullied, and people who suffer from mental illness should definitely get help. But not everybody, and I would say most people who are bullied and have mental illness don't go out and do what Harris and Klebold did. These two were straight up psychopaths, and I believe that the evil that they've committed is much more than what they went through in high school or whatever mental illness they were dealing with. Something spiritually dark was involved that day, and they decided to go down the dark path instead of doing what was right. Because of their wicked choices and actions, 13 people lost their lives. 22 people are traumatized by the physical and even emotional scars, and everyone in that building are traumatized for the rest of their lives. As for the 13 victims, they all had their lives ahead of them, but it was snatched away because two monsters felt like hurting people because they were hurt themselves. Since the year is coming to a close and a new year is beginning, the family of those 13 victims will sadly spend another year without their loved ones. My prayer is that God will comfort them and that they would seek God, because I can only imagine that these past 23 years hasn't been easier without their loved ones with them. Since the year is coming to a close, especially with this sort of subject matter, my prayer is that you all stay safe this coming year. My prayer is that you would seek God, and if you don't have a personal relationship with Jesus, I pray that you would accept the free gift of salvation that He offers. These are some evil days that we are living in, and we definitely shouldn't take our lives for granted. I wish you all a happy new year, and I'm looking forward at what God has in store for this channel. I thank you all for taking the time today to watch this video. If you did like this video, please feel free to hit the like button. If you have any thoughts on this case at all, please leave your thoughts in the comment section below. If you'd like to see more videos from me, please feel free to subscribe and click the bell to be notified about the next video. If there is a certain true crime case that you'd like me to cover, go ahead and let me know. I will see y'all for next True Crime Tuesdays, and I will talk to y'all next year.